This is the Sports and Society podcast, where we go beyond scores, statistics, and personalities to focus on issues and controversies in sports worlds. Your hosts, Jake Oakley and Jeff Montes de Oca, are sports sociologists and the authors of the book, Sports and Society, Issues and Controversies. The episodes in this podcast give you a behind-the-scenes look at the textbook with stories from our lives as scholars and athletes, as well as providing analysis of ongoing issues and controversies in contemporary sport worlds. We welcome hearing your thoughts and analysis, so please use this space to engage with us about the textbook or any of the topics we cover in this podcast. Hello and welcome to the Sports and Society podcast. Your hosts are Jay Oakley and Jeff Montes de Oca. Hey, Jay.
Hey, Jeff. Good to be here today and with our guests.
Yeah, so this episode is going to address a few different themes that run through the textbook, Sports and Society. But it's especially going to focus on the role of government and non-governmental organizations in the management of outdoor sports resources, which is especially relevant to Chapter 13, Sports and Politics. We're also going to address how mountain biking can be an example of what Jay calls people sports. Before we introduce the guests, Jay, do you mind just reminding folks, what do you mean by people sports?
Yeah, people sports are on one end of a continuum, with the other end being Paralympic sports. And Paralympic sports are heavily organized. They're controlled by federations and governing bodies. And so they're controlled from above, in a sense. And people sports are sports that are created by and for the people who are participating. And some people call them recreational sports, but people sports can be competitive as long as the participants are the main factor in organizing the competition on their terms. So they're much freer. They're not as bureaucratic. It's kind of a control from below rather than a control from above. And those are very important in a society because they're probably related to health issues in a much more significant way than some of the Paralympic sports. So they're important to consider, and that's one of the things that we'll be talking about today.
Yeah, I think that in this episode, our guests are really going to help us think about sport more broadly than we're encouraged in mainstream media. So let me introduce our guests. They're both on the board of a nonprofit trail organization called Medicine Wheel Trail Advocates, or MedWheel, and MedWheel, we're bikers who build, share, and protect inspiring trail experiences. And my language is already given this way, but full disclosure, I'm on the board of MedWheel with them. So the first guest we're going to introduce is Dr. Corey Satella, who is a native of Alberta, Canada, where he grew up with a passion for skiing, hiking, and cycling. He earned a PhD in mechanical engineering from Cambridge University. And then later in his life, he moved to the Pikes Peak region in 2004 to work as a test engineer for a bicycle component manufacturer. As executive director of MedWheel, Corey's responsibility is to ensure that MedWheel has the structure, funding, and volunteer workforce needed to sustain and grow the organization and advance its mission. Shane McCormick is a communication instructor at the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs, which happens to be where I work as well. And Shane, he explores how messages shape connection, identity, and influence across interpersonal, professional, and public speaking contexts. A former Army linguist and nonprofit manager, he now serves on the board of his local mountain bike trail association, MedWheel, combining his passion for outdoor recreation with a commitment to sustainability, land stewardship, and community access. As a mountain biker and bike packer, he views his time on trail not just as sport, but as a deeply personal and restorative experience. Welcome to the podcast, gentlemen.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Great. So let's jump in with the first two questions we ask all of our guests. And I'll ask the first question. We'll start with Corey, and then we'll go to Shane. But Corey, can you describe your experience in sports?
Yeah, what a big question. When I was growing up, as you mentioned, I grew up in Alberta, Canada, and my father was a phys ed teacher at a small rural school. And so I grew up immersed in sports, nearly every sport you could imagine. I had access to all kinds of, I had access to a gymnasium on weekends and spent a lot of time with my father. He was really into cross-country skiing. He's deeply interested in organized sports. He was a coach of the volleyball team at the high school. He played rugby. He played broomball. Unlike a lot of families in Canada, we weren't really into ice hockey. But I would say my background in sport was heavily influenced by my father's deep connection with sports. I didn't even mention he was also really into track and field, and was such a committed volunteer that the Alberta Track and Field Association has named a volunteer award after him. So for sure, my connection to sports and to volunteering comes to me through my father.
How about for you, Shane? Tell us a little bit about your experience in sports.
Sure. So I grew up playing sports recreationally. That was sort of a part of our upbringing, actually a central part. My uncle played soccer professionally in El Salvador, and so we were all required to play soccer growing up, me and all of my cousins. My mother studied physical therapy and sports training, and so she had this very philosophical perspective on playing sport as sort of a well-rounded education. And so we had to play a little bit of every sort of team sport, right? So did volleyball as a kid, did baseball as a kid, so of course, soccer. Didn't get into cycling until later on in life, but certainly it was around when I was a child, and it was sort of a central part of being a kid, is being on a sports team, playing AYSO soccer, playing recreational t-ball, or playing baseball as I got older.
So Shane, I know you're not a sports scholar, but you are deeply engaged in the management of sport through MedWheel, and deeply engaged in mountain biking and bike packing. How would you say that your experience growing up informs especially the work that you do through MedWheel?
Sure. I would say that I personally have never been into like sports fandom. For example, I grew up in a family of rabid sports fans. I married into we'll call it a passionate Packer family, and I was always much more interested in like the participatory side of things and getting in there and doing things. And so for me, mountain biking was such a powerful outlet for that, right? To get out there and actually do things, and to test my body, and to explore and get into adventure. And so I think that's really informed my experience being in MedWheel, trying to give people the opportunity to have that same experience, and test themselves, and to grow, and to see a bunch of beautiful things and have a lot of fun.
Awesome. Well, how about for you, Corey?
Yeah, I think like Shane, I grew up playing a lot of organized sports. So I played, reasonably seriously through school: volleyball, basketball, soccer, badminton. I got into cycling, I think it was the last year of high school, and I like this idea of the personal sports versus the pro Olympic sports. I think on the cycling side, I've maybe experienced both ends of that. I joined a road racing team and was fairly interested in being part of a team. What drew me to mountain biking was, first of all, the experience on trails, but also the way that I could personalize that experience, and the connection that I made with other people that were personalizing their experience, but not in a really structured way. So mountain biking was kind of a bridge between the structured and the less structured and more personal experience of sport.
Awesome. So, Corey, we'll have you go next, and just Can you talk a little bit about MedWheel? What is it? What does it do?
Yeah, Jeff, so you mentioned our mission is to build, share, and protect inspiring trail experiences. And essentially what we do is we advocate for, we design and construct and maintain trails. Our mission is specifically worded to not say mountain bike trails. We have a strong belief in the healing power of trails. As mountain bikers, we feel healed and more human when we can connect with trails through mountain biking. But we also really believe in trail sharing and the experience of being on trails with others. So our mission specifically doesn't say mountain bike trails, and occasionally we will, in increasingly frequent circumstances, we will advocate for separated use trails, particularly for downhill mountain biking. More and more that's requiring a separated use from all other users. But throughout our, almost 35-year history, Medicine Wheel has really sought to build connections and partnerships with all other trail users, whether those are hikers or bird watchers or dog walkers, motorcyclists, equestrians, all other trail users we believe are, in the right circumstances. Not every trail is suitable for all uses, but generally there's a really high value to our community when we can share trails together and be outside together and have that positive experience with others in our community. So we are working to build a world-class network of mountain bike trails, but we also strongly believe in multi-use trails and trail sharing.
Yeah, and just for listeners who are not mountain bikers or regular trail users, when Corey says separate use trails, that might be a trail that's designated only for hikers. And that would mean bikers, equestrians, people on horses could not use that trail. Similarly, there might be a downhill bike trail only. And these things are important because the trails are narrow, and different users use the trails very differently. And so it's the same space, and there can be competition over the use of that particular space. So if you're a mountain biker and you're screaming down a mountain over 20 miles an hour on a very thin trail, if somebody is walking up the trail in the opposite direction, it's a potential site of conflict, and even dangerous. And so there, as Corey said, there is increasing demand for separate use trails. Go ahead, Jay.
Yeah, and this reminds me of some of the organized youth sports and adult sports as well, where you have to reserve a field, for example, and you go through Parks and Recreation, and so they're multi-use in a sense, but there's a reservation process, and I'm wondering if that exists in connection with trails.
Yeah, I'll answer that, Jay. Yes, certainly in lots of places, those kind of so some of the decisions that have been made, there are dedicated separate use trails like we've talked about, but there's also some places where Monday is a hiking day and Tuesday is a mountain biking day. There are also some trails that are directional, and the direction changes on the day. So a few different solutions to that sort of crowding and user conflict problem have been investigated with varying degrees of success. None of them is perfect, but some of them work well in different circumstances.
So Corey, can you talk? So you've been executive director for MedWheel for a long time. You've been involved in MedWheel over the past 20 years. Can you talk about your vision? When you look at the Pikes Peak region, and this is a large area. So Colorado Springs, where we are, Pikes Peak, America's Mountains here. We're on the front range of the Rocky Mountains. So there's a tremendous amount of outdoor resources available, and people in Colorado tend to be very outdoor oriented. So outdoor sports are very popular here. And you've worked incredibly hard to bring to life a vision for a trail system here. Can you talk a bit about your vision and how you look at outdoor space and think about how different people, as you've said, not just bikers, hikers, equestrians, motorcycle riders, bird watchers, and so forth, can use those spaces for recreation.
Yeah, well, I think, the first thing that I'd like to highlight and that you mentioned, Jeff, is we live in a city. Colorado Springs is the 40th largest city by population in America. We don't live in a tiny ski town like Steamboat, or even, a river town like Salida. These are small recreation. Today they are recreation-focused towns in Colorado. And a lot of small towns in Colorado are seeing a transition from mining or other extractive industries and are really relying on recreation and tourism as a way to keep their economies going. Colorado Springs is not that kind of a place. We have a major airport. We are, as I said, the 40th largest city. We've got a huge, we have I wouldn't say huge, I guess. It's 500,000 people, but there are really diverse interests amongst the residents and the people that visit here. And so we don't have the opportunity to say, okay, we're going to completely turn this place into a well-known world-class destination mountain biking center. Although I'm going to argue that we have some of the best mountain biking that exists, across Colorado or the nation. We've got, don't tell anyone, but we've got great trails and great weather. And so really, Colorado Springs is one of the best places to mountain bike, but we often get compared to the resort communities where it is the sole focus. And that's a challenge that we deal with. My vision for Colorado Springs is that mountain bikers are a positive and consistent voice and part of the conversation about land use, so that every time there's a land use discussion, and we might talk about this a bit more later, but there are multiple land managers in this area, and that makes the whole discussion challenging on another level. But the idea is mountain bikers can, we can heal the trails. We can also heal some of the relationships that get strained when people have a different vision for how public spaces should be used. And just on that note, as a recently naturalized American citizen, I'm understanding of the responsibility of civic engagement. And I really think it's important that we as citizens and we as mountain bikers are involved in all of these discussions.
Yeah, Corey, that you've raised a whole set of issues that I'd like you and Shane to address, and some of them come under the title of politics. And I'm wondering, how do you deal with conflict resolution as an organization? And then how do you interface with government agencies that either assist you or create problems for you in the process of moving towards your vision? And Shane, why don't you start, and then Corey can fill in the blanks.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to chime in, but I think this is so central to what Corey does with Medicine Wheel. He'd probably have a lot more powerful insights that are there. I will say this, coming in as an outsider into Medicine Wheel and having only been a recreational mountain biker, I was shocked at the extent to which there is coordination and collaboration with all of these competing interests. So you have, different land managers that are getting involved. You have different trail users that are getting involved. You're collaborating with other organizations that are maybe supplemental, others of them that might be more competitive. And so that degree of orchestration, I thought, was just quite impressive and frankly really surprising.
And Corey, before you start, one of the things that might be useful is, because you use terms like land managers, and our listeners might not know what you mean by land manager. So maybe you can define that and kind of paint a map from the local area where we have a very complicated political terrain to the state and maybe even nationally.
Sure. So yeah, when I say a land manager, generally I mean the person who is ultimately responsible, or the person or the entity that is ultimately responsible for public lands. Although I might get sloppy with that, because sometimes we also deal with private landowners that allow public access, and they're also a land manager. But generally, I'm meaning public land managers, And starting at the local level, our largest public land manager is the City of Colorado Springs in the Parks Department. We also work with several other communities in this area. Notably, Manitou Springs has got a lot of mountain trails, and so we work with that entity as a land manager. And there are a few other smaller communities like Fountain and Monument and some others in our region. Then at the next level, there would be the county, El Paso County, and we've got a lot of trails on El Paso County Parks land. And so they're, as you said, Jay, they're both, a partner, and sometimes there are challenges, and there's always some collaboration and some tension there. We interact also with the state at some level. Usually the state comes in sort of on the state park level. So we've got a couple of state parks with trail access near our community. And then on the national level, our biggest land manager partner in this region is the U.S. Forest Service. So the Pike National Forest is our local ranger district, and that is a substantial land manager, and it comes with all of the bureaucracy that you might imagine from a federally operated agency, which is also going through a lot of changes right now. So the approach that Medicine Wheel has always taken with the land managers, and I would say with other user partners, is really to try to get to know them and to find out what their priorities are, to build some kind of relationship with them, recognizing we're not always going to have the same specific goals, but in the big picture, we have similar objectives, and to try not to take it personally and to try not to make it personal. We work on problems and don't attack people. We try to support in public, and if we have criticism, then to say that in private settings. Don't put someone in a position where they would lose face, but do build a relationship where it's possible to get into that rumble space a little bit, where we can really dig into what's important to us, what's important to our users, and what's important to the land manager partners. I think the other thing that really helps me in my job is Medicine Wheel has adopted a set of values that really help to guide us. So if we're not sure about, this is a complicated or nuanced issue on public land, I always fall back and I look at our values and say, okay, well, what would our values drive us to do? That it does two things. One, it helps me to remember what our board has asked us to pursue, and also helps me to make it not personal.
Maybe a good example of that is when we have to wrestle with the issue of trail closures, because, we're, as an organization, we're trying to foster inspiring trail experiences. We're not trying to foster uninspiring trail closures, but sometimes we do have to close trails, and it's that set of values that you're talking about, the vision of the organization that guides that. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that as an example of a problem, a political problem that we have to solve on the land.
Yeah, great point, Jeff. So, like we said, our mission is build, share, and protect inspiring trails. That doesn't immediately explain why we would be involved in closing trails. But one of our values is conservation. We want these healing experiences that are achieved by recreational trail use. We want those to be available for the next 7 generations and beyond. So we need to make sure the spaces that we're recreating on are properly supported. And there are cases where, in order to be a good partner, we do have to jump in and repair damage that has been done. We try to be really careful about that. We've got a large volunteer workforce. We've got lots of tools and expertise, and we don't generally want to deploy that on painting park benches and picking up dog poop and closing trails or repairing erosion damage. What we would like to do is show up as a positive part of the community and the fabric of this whole group that does care for these spaces and make a positive impact. And sometimes that does lead us to where we have to involve some trail closures, and we do our best to talk about that and talk about why it's important. And if we're able to take care of this and support our land manager partners, it opens more doors for us in the future to be able to do the things that we really are more interested in, which is more cool trails.
So one of the things that I think goes along with this is the idea that these are scarce resources that are publicly owned, right? Or at least we all have public access to them. And so we're trying to navigate how to make a high value, useful, inspiring, enriching means of experiencing these. And so even the trail design has to navigate those competing priorities, because you could make a trail that is really, really well designed for, let's say, hikers who are probably going to be the majority of the users of it, but we want them to be enjoyable and useful to mountain bikers. But of course, if we go too far in the direction of satisfying the mountain biker itch, then we might be isolating other trail users as well. And so there's just a lot of things that are connected that go into making these kinds of decisions, and of course allowing for the collective to get the most use out of the resource.
Yeah, Shane, on that, does Medicine Wheel do recruiting, or do you have programs that give young people an opportunity to experience the trails in a way that in a sense aligns them with you and your purpose at Medicine Wheel?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've done a lot of work to engage young cyclists, whether it's building, some of the more fun, gravity-oriented type of trails, doing what's called a pump track, right, which is like sort of BMX style, mountain bike jumping style trails. We developed a mountain bike race course. My understanding, it's the first on the Front Range, first of its kind. And so the idea there is to try to integrate young people into the sport. And of course, we want to sort of inculcate our values with that too, right? That it's not just mountain biking for the sake of mountain biking, but this bigger vision that we have of experiencing nature, being good stewards of the land, connecting with other people that have similar passions and values, etc.
And maybe, Corey, you can add to what Shane said. You've worked with schools, you've worked with scouts, you've done a lot to recruit young people into trail building, understanding the trails, and understanding civic engagement in public spaces.
Yeah, that's it's been a major part of our work, and obviously it comes with some mixed success. You get a range of outcomes. We've done several Eagle Scout projects. As Shane mentioned, we've got a mountain bike race course that we were able to get opened up at Fountain Valley School, which is really a unique. It's a unique thing for young people. I think, the kind of facility that really helps to bring young people into the sport is someplace where parents could know their kids could be out using the space and they're relatively safe. Okay, you could crash and scratch your elbow, but when your kid goes to the Goose Gossage pump track or there's several pump tracks around town that we've been involved in, your kid might go and could spend hours there and is relatively entertained in a healthy way. It's a positive experience and it's relatively safe. Medicine Wheel doesn't directly organize a lot of programs that do that, but we try to create the facilities and then partner with other organizations that do provide programs. So as just an example, we raised the money and managed the construction of the Cresta Bike Park. And that was a partnership with an organization called Kids on Bikes that does programs for kids, and also the Cheyenne Mountain Cycling Team, which is a high school race team. So we really try to find partnerships that can build in that direction. Another local partner that I really would like to mention is Concrete Couch. So this is a long-running nonprofit in our region, at least 20 years. I'm not sure their entire history. They, in the last 5 or 6 years, they have their own facility, and we were involved in making a trail plan and building some trails on their facility. It's a fantastic space. It really brings kids into the outdoors, and they've got nature programs and things like this, and they wanted to include mountain biking. So last year, working with an Eagle Scout, we also built a pump track there, and we maintain a relationship with them. And so there are programs going on several a week that are using the infrastructure that we built with Concrete Couch. And then we occasionally will get together with them for an event or a celebration or some more trail work. So we try to piggyback on other organizations that are successful in that space and find ways to be a synergistic partner. We can do things they can't do, and they do things we can't do. And so that partnership works really well.
Yeah, this is really fantastic. And I just want to underline a point that both Corey and Shane keep illustrating, in case it's not super obvious, which is these are all questions of sport management. How do we manage sport resources? How do we think about sport more broadly than just a competition with a victor and a vanquished, right? How do we engage the public in the world they live in their society, through different forms of sport participation? And we're going to get to this in a moment, but I really want to get to the idea Shane's mentioned a few times of healing, and the way in which biking can be very, very healing. But Jay, go ahead. You have a question.
Yeah, it's not really a question, but resources and sustainability are big issues when it comes to the use of outdoor spaces, getting to them, having the equipment and the other things that you need, and then making sure that you're engaging in sustainable sport practices. And so as long as we can hit that, as Shane and Corey talk about the issues that you've raised, I think that would be very important for a lot of our listeners.
Yeah, I think that's an incredibly important question, which actually I have planned for us. We'll get to that in a moment, but I have another question I want to ask first. This is going to be more directed to Shane, but one of the things that's just imminently clear from everything Corey and Shane has said so far is the passion that drives their work. And one part of that passion in sociology, we call that value rationality. It's the idea that people are driven by their values, that they're trying to do things just because it's the right thing to do, and that will result in a good outcome. So these are things that are defined by our values. Another part is the pleasure and passion that sports, even non-competitive sports, generate. And Shane, this is where I was hoping you can jump in and talk about how cycling and mountain biking in particular can generate so much passion in people, and how that can be healing and restorative, and all of the things that we talk about as cyclists and as members of MedWheel.
Sure. I think that it's pretty easy to fall in love with cycling as an endeavor because it ticks so many of those boxes. And some of them are the sort of general things that everybody loves about sports and physical activity, right? Like there's psychological benefits to getting out there and using your body. There's neurobiological benefits to that. The runner's high, decrease in cortisol levels, like all of those things that you could get doing anything, doing pickleball, right? But cycling also has these other, I think, unique and meaningful attributes that really drive a lot of passion. So it tends to be something that people do socially, right? Like group rides are a central part of being a cyclist. People hang out with other cyclists at breweries or at coffee shops when they go for rides. And so there's this social connection piece. And of course, when we start building community, we get like in groups and out groups. So people get really passionate about being a mountain biker versus a road cyclist, for example, right? Or if you're a mountain biker, are you a downhill mountain biker? Or are you more cross country? And so it's connecting with other people in this way and satisfying this kind of primal itch that I think we have. But beyond that, I think that there's something that's more transcendent. And I think that's what you're getting at, Jeff. Like there's something more Maslowian, being the best version of yourself, right? And so cycling also scratches that itch. And I think really powerful ways, right? We have this sort of self-actualized idea of being the best version of ourselves when we're on the trail, being responsible in the way that we manage the land that we're using, right? Pushing yourself to do some really difficult obstacle when you're on the trail or to get up a hill faster and those kinds of things. Then you're tapping into like, environmentalism, right? Like a bike is a really powerful way of getting around that is perhaps less taxing than some other ways of doing that. So yeah, it's tough to not fall in love with cycling once you get into it.
How about for you, Corey? What do you think drives your passion? Because you work relentlessly hard in all of these spaces, and there's just so much passion that you bring.
Yeah, why is that? Boy, I thought this was sociology, not psychology. Well, I think in a way, Shane touched on this, and I've been thinking about this for the last couple of days because recently I was able to attend a show we had by a world-renowned bike packer, and I think the unique thing for me about cycling, and I think it touches kids when they first learn to bike, and it creates that freedom for them to travel around their neighborhood and to be with their friends, and that can scale all the way up to the entire world. So the idea that it's not just exercise that that has all of the emotional and physical and societal benefits of any kind of exercise, but this idea that we're also traveling to places, sometimes alone, which has its own value, and then sometimes with other people to share that experience, and it deepens our connection with other people, all the way up to, traveling through the highlands of Tibet and pushing your bike for 3 days just so you can get to that place where not many people go, and to have that experience and that connection. Maybe that's by yourself, and that brings its own value, or maybe it's with a friend, and it creates a kind of bond that will last for your whole life. I believe in that power of cycling to heal me and to make me a better human and to connect with people around me. And I think that's where my passion comes from. I think the world is a better place if we ride more and we ride together. If instead of driving our car to work every day, we could ride our bike 10 minutes or whatever to get to work and wave at our neighbors and see people and smell the grass. I think that overall makes the whole our whole community a better place to live. So I don't really know why I do it, but I think that might be related.
Really quickly, I do commute to work by bicycle, and I have the choice of driving my car on the interstate up to my work, or I could ride my bicycle along the Monument Creek. There's a path that runs along the Monument Creek. And I end up, I do end up sometimes a little sweaty at work, but I keep a change of clothes in my office, which is a, advantage of being a professional class worker. But rather than being stressed out and harried when I get to work, I'm relaxed. I've connected with a natural space while I'm moving myself through space rather than being propelled by a fossil fuel burning vehicle. Go ahead, Shane.
Yeah, I think that what we're alluding to in this conversation is that like riding a bike facilitates all of these things that we know make for a really rich experience on planet Earth, right? It's not necessarily exclusive to biking, and you could probably get there by whatever, gardening or mini golf or something else, but being in the outdoors, interacting with other human beings frequently, like feeling like you are overcoming something, and it's all of that is packaged in this this one little invention called the bicycle, and it gives us this opportunity to explore all these really important domains. You all are the sociologists, so you could probably articulate what's happening there in a more theoretical sense. But it's allowing for us to check a lot of boxes that I think are necessary and part of the human experience.
I mean, everything you're talking about is fundamental to leisure, in fact. And some of it's specific to cycling, because there's different leisure activities, or we could say, I just forgot the word that we use for these type of activities, but these are all leisure type activities. And there's a way to think about this. Everyday life is really stressful. We go to work, maybe if you're a student, you're going to school, and that experience can be profoundly alienating, where you're forced to do something that you don't necessarily want to do, and it's not under the conditions of your own creation, but you have to do it because you got to go to school to get that certificate so you can get that job that's going to pay your rent, that's going to put food on your table and do all of these other things. The other thing is so there's that, the bulk of your day is spent school, work, whatever. But then you go home, and home is a place to escape from work, but home can also be profoundly stressful as well. No matter how much we love our family, our families can be highly demanding upon us. They can be very stressful. You've got to cook, you've got to clean, you've got all these different things. Like, if you're a homeowner, then your house needs constant maintenance. There's all these stresses for us. So then we want to get away from that. We want to escape from that. And that's where leisure comes in, because these are hobbies. That's the word I was looking for, right? Hobbies is labor that we do, the structured uses of our bodies, but we have control over them. So I always say, I'm the person I want to be when I'm cycling. I'm skillful. I'm in control of my time. I'm in control of my body. I'm daring and brave. And I can do all of these different things in that leisure space through that hobby activity. Now, specifically with mountain biking, when you're coming down a mountain, there is nothing but the trail, your bicycle, and you. Every stress of your everyday life disappears, because if there is anything else besides the trail, the bicycle, and you, you're looking at serious discomfort. And as a person with a lot of metal in my body now, right, I'm very familiar with the discomfort that can happen when you lose focus for a second. It's incredibly powerful, and it gives us the strength to go back to those workplaces with passion, to go back to our families with passion. So these things are incredibly powerful. Corey, I think you had wanted to add something in.
Yeah, I was just going to sort of comment on the, there's the aspect of the recreation, and I agree with everything you just said. And I think it also applies to commuting to work and back by bike. And, coming from Canada, I used to spend a year-round commuter, and it never stops making me chuckle when I see someone in the winter and they're like, oh my gosh, how could you be outside on a day like today? And I usually laugh and say, I've got the right gear. I'm probably warmer than you are going to work, because I'm not getting out and having to, scrape the ice off my cold car. I'm ready to go. My heart rate is up. And honestly, it's usually the best part of my day. I'm probably having it is a highlight for me. And I'm generally, if you're prepared, you're warmer than other people. And it's something that I wish more people could experience. So both, the recreational side as well as the transportation side.
So this is a lot of fun for me to hear the three of us talk as cyclists and get so excited about it, because I think it's illustrating the exact point that you're getting at, Jeff. And I think you described it so eloquently. It's an opportunity for us to be the best version of ourselves, right? And in so many different domains, it's such an enriching experience. Like, I get to be really brave, and I get to slay a dragon when I ride my bike, right? And I also get to be a really responsible citizen and not destroy the planet. And I also wave at people as they're walking on the trail for their morning walk. And so I'm engaged in that way, and it's so meaningful. There's a phrase in the cycling world, is that the bicycle is our noblest invention. And I think that that's coming through in this conversation, right? Like, it facilitates so many societal goods and so many individual goods for us. It's really unique in that way.
Yeah. Corey, by the way, psychology and sociology intersect at a number of different points, even in the book that Jeff and I are doing, Sports and Society. But one of the things that I'm thinking about as both you and Shane are talking, and Jeff, is we are talking about people's sports in a sense. I mean, we have different words, leisure, hobby, and so on, but we're talking about physical activities that are created by and for the participants. And one of the things that I've noticed with young people, and I've read some research on this too, is that parents are controlling the activities and lives of their children outside the house in ways that they haven't for the past couple of generations. And the kinds of freedom that I had and that Jeff had don't exist for a lot of young people. And one of the issues that I'm thinking about here is, how do people learn to engage that passion that you're talking about in these activities that are self-created in a sense, or group-created, and are young people missing out on the very things that would be the source of passion in their lives when it comes to physical activities? And I know that both Corey and Shane can talk about, and Jeff could talk about this with respect to cycling. But if you could broaden it a little bit and talk about some of the group things and the things that people invent, in a sense, while they're cycling in a group, because that takes some practice to be that kind of a creative person when it comes to organizing your physical activities on your own. And where do people learn that?
So I can speak to this a bit from my discipline in communication, when we talk about how we cultivate relationships and how we get like enculturated with certain norms and practices when we interact with people. And certainly when kids are given the latitude to go out there and to engage with one another, they're developing these really profound social skills that will serve them well throughout the rest of their life, right? Like playing stickball or going out for a bike ride gives you an opportunity to engage in small talk and to practice like disclosure and reciprocity. Like somebody told me that they're worried about the grade that they got in a test and telling their parents, right? So how am I going to respond to that? And what am I going to reveal in turn to cultivate this relationship? And I have a lot of concerns for young people having to navigate these waters, because of course we're becoming more and more isolated, and going out for a ride with your friends when you're 10, 11 years old is diminishing. And so what are the things that we're missing because of that isolation, right? You're learning conflict management when you're interacting with kids about what we're going to do, where we're going to stop next. But if you're not getting that practice, then you're not going to cultivate the skill in the same way.
Yeah, pickup games, by the way, fit into this discussion, and that's one of the things I've studied over the years. And the things that you're saying, Shane, all of those things are learned in pickup games, and you don't necessarily learn them in formally organized youth sports. So we're talking about, like I say, types of sports that are on the extreme ends of the continuum of sport.
Corey mentioned Kids on Bikes earlier, and that's an organization that I have volunteered with as a coach. I've coached their bike camps for the last 3 summers. And so I think it's interesting because organizations like that provide formal training in mountain biking so that kids can learn the basic skills and develop a passion for cycling. But then these kids are going to go out on their own. And they're just going to go ride, particularly in a place. I mean, we're really blessed in Colorado Springs because so many of us, because we have so many different, we call them open spaces. They're basically large municipal parks that are just undeveloped, other than they have trails in them. And you can just go out and riding and have those kinds of experiences that you're talking about, Jay. But I want to move us in a slightly different direction now, because there is an irony to all this that we're talking about. So I have a couple of questions, and we're going to just take them one at a time. So my first question, it centers on the fact that, as we've been talking about, people are drawn to mountain biking because of their commitments to sustainability, to connecting to nature that heals us, that desire to connect with other people, to, as Shane very poetically says, to be our best selves when we're out on the trail. But like other outdoor sports, and this is not unique to cycling, mountain biking or cycling, outdoor sports, they tend to be very industry-driven sports, right? You can't be a mountain biker without that commodity, the mountain bike. And that means there's a lot of waste that the cycling industry generates. It might be less wasteful than the automobile industry, but still there's a lot of unsustainable waste. So I was hoping that you two could talk a little bit about, and maybe Shane, you'll start here. How do you balance these contradictory tendencies?
Right. I'm not sure I do it well, so I guess I'll start by saying that I think a big piece of it is the awareness of the dynamics that you're describing right now. So these are commercialized commodities, right? And if these big companies that produce this equipment had their druthers, we'd be replacing our bicycles every single year because of some small incremental innovation. And I'm sure every domain is like this, right? There's so much pressure to go, okay, well, I got to keep up to speed with this. I need it faster. I need it lighter. It needs to allow for me to ride, half a second faster on the same stretch. When you're aware that there's those sort of forces at play, I think it's easier to respond to that, right? Certainly in the cycling world, there is a heavy emphasis on racing and race culture. And I think there's a part of all of us that imagines ourselves winning the Tour de France or, right, like becoming a gold medalist in mountain biking. But by and by, I think in practice, most of us don't need these hyper specialized tools, despite all of the marketing that is presented to us, right? So one thing that I try to do in my own personal life is to hold on to the gear that I do purchase for perhaps longer than would be fashionable to do that. And I sort of wear it as a badge of honor too. One of my hobbies is restoring old, like, vintage bicycles. The technology has moved on, but they were completely capable of riding all around the world some 20, 30 years ago. And there's something kind of romantic about that. But I also think that there's a sort of ethical imperative to not consume so much and to not be looking for the next thing, and to focus on the actual things that I'm looking for in cycling, right? Which is not necessarily being the fastest rider in Colorado Springs, but it is being outdoors and challenging myself and feeling like I'm being a good citizen and feeling whole and growing, and all of those like beautiful, maybe more abstract aspects of cycling and maybe physical activity in general.
That's so well said, Corey. I'm sorry, Corey. So Shane, that's so well said, because one of the things that we've talked about is cycling as a pleasure and participation sport, the term that Jay developed. And one of the things the industry wants to do is push cycling into power and performance sports. We are constantly striving to increase some objective metric. Fast, you cover the same space in less time, so you're going faster, you're coming down a hill faster, you're jumping higher, you're jumping farther, right? You're doing something more gnarly, and that does drive consumption of unsustainable commodities, and it's really, really expensive on the individual. I mean, a high level mountain bike could cost you $10,000. That is a lot of money for a bicycle. Right. And the industry would love you replacing that bicycle regularly. And, when I talk to people who say, oh, yeah, I really need to get a new bicycle, my bike's old. And I'll say, well, does your bike work? And they'll say, well, yeah, I've maintained it. And I'm like, well, that means your bicycle, that bicycle you loved when you bought it, it's the exact same bicycle. You're still having that same pleasurable experience every time you ride your bike. But there's a second question, and this one's more about resource management. So this is really more directed to you, Corey. One of the things that research finds is that the most destructive aspect of outdoor sports is the building of trails itself. I should say of cycling, the hiking, all of that. It's the trail building, what we do. We're trail builders. That is a highly destructive of wilderness spaces. And if you build a trail, right, you build it, people will come. People will use the trail. It will draw people into wilderness areas. So from your perspective, Corey, how does an organization like MedWheel balance people's desires to recreate, or we could say recreate themselves in nature, and and how do we protect wilderness areas?
Well, I like the way you worded that, Jeff, and I'm assume you're trying to trigger me, um, because particularly in our area with the erosive soils that we've got, the most impactful thing that happens to our trails is poor water management. So we here in Colorado Springs, we live at the bottom of a crumbling pile of gravel. It's called Pikes Peak, and our soils are notoriously unstable. So there's a civil engineering aspect to trail design, and a major part of what we do day in and day out is design trails that are able to manage water and to reduce the erosional impacts while still being fun and still being suitable for multiple users. That's really the secret sauce of making a great mountain bike trail in this region. But I think, the way you worded that is, it's a common conception that, well, gosh, we have this perfect space, and if we put a trail on it, it's going to draw all of these people in to use it. And the reality is, the way I see it across Colorado, and particularly here in Colorado Springs, people are here and they're coming here to connect with the outdoors, and they are going to go to those spaces regardless of if there's a trail or not. And that's a fundamental thing that we have to acknowledge. And once we're at that point, we can say, well, actually putting in a properly designed trail that respects the resource, takes people to the places they want to go, keeps them away from places that's important they don't go for some specific resource reason. Particularly keeping people out of riparian areas. So we don't want people riding their bikes down a stream. But we know people are going to want to go to the stream and experience it. So our trail must visit the stream, but it has to interact responsibly with that stream and in a sustainable way. So I very regularly have this conversation with land managers. They'll say, okay, well, yeah, we're ready to talk about your recreation project. And I say, hey, people are already recreating. This is a conservation project. I want to work with you to put in a really good trail so that there is one trail, and that's where the people will go. And if you build it properly, they'll use it. There's a segment of people that are always going to have this mindset that like, oh, I'm this explorer and I'm going off trail. Typically for mountain bikers, that's not what we want to do. It's kind of a pain to bushwhack through and carry your bike where there isn't a trail. If we can build the right trails that access the places that people want to visit, it really reduces the temptation for people to go off trail and to damage the resource even more. So that's really the stance that we try to take with that. So I always push back on the idea that trails are going to bring people here. The quote that I always heard from a mentor, Tony Boone, is the people don't need trails, but the land needs trails. People will go there. The land needs trails in order to protect the land.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Because you think about a space like Colorado Springs. You said there's 500,000 people here, and we're a growing community, and a large percentage of those people want to experience the outdoors. Plus, because of Pikes Peak, Garden of the Gods, and just the Rocky Mountains, we get a tremendous number of tourists every single year coming here also to experience the outdoor resources. And so an organization like MedWheel really has to think very, very carefully. And that goes back to why I asked Corey about the vision you've had over the past 20 years for this whole region, that this is not done haphazardly. What you do, you don't do it haphazardly. Even if you didn't have a crystal clear vision 20 years ago, you've been guided by a set of values and some basic understandings. And of course, you've developed that analysis over time. And so you're an incredible sport manager working at the municipal level, engaging with government officials, engaging with private individuals, engaging with business and non-profit partners to bring that vision into a reality that hundreds of thousands of people can enjoy annually, which is incredibly powerful. And that's not unique to cycling. I think that's the point I hope listeners take away from this episode is that, yeah, we've spoken specifically about the Colorado Springs Pikes Peak area. We've spoken specifically about outdoor sports and cycling, but these are broader dynamics that will vary by different communities. So I was wondering, for maybe Corey and Shane, you could each sort of talk about, for people that are interested in community development, using sport for community development, using sport as a resource for people's physical and mental health, and they want to get into that as a profession. What kind of advice could you give them for traveling that path?
Good question. I think what comes to mind for me is the most successful people I see in this space are ones who have a passion and can have an understanding of their connection to the better world that they're trying to create. So, the first thing is to sit down and understand yourself and understand really what it is that you want and what are the values that are driving you. And then, the sort of the old adage of do what you love and the results will follow. I think in my direct experience, I was a volunteer for MedWheel for 15 years before I became a director and an employee of the organization. So essentially I had a 15-year unpaid internship before I got into this job. I don't think that's universally necessary, but I think the idea is you want to find a way to get involved on a grassroots level with the things that drive you personally, and then be open to other opportunities. Look for ways that you can step into spaces, and if you can identify needs and help fill them, go ask questions. Don't go out and start your whole brand new thing based on your vision. Ask questions about from people that are already involved in that space, and doors will start to open. Is as specific as I can be without being too specific.
Yeah, no, I think that's really great. I mean, you talk about that 15-year internship, and I mean, obviously Doctor of Mechanical Engineering, you brought a high level of expertise just coming here, to work for a bicycle manufacturing company. But you learned a lot about the community, the specific needs of this community, the political landscape. So you built a tremendous knowledge. But on top of building a tremendous knowledge, you also build a tremendous network of relationships with other people locally, in the state. I mean, we could do more than a whole episode just discussing the political networks you've developed over the decades. So all of that sets you up well. And I don't think it takes a 15-year internship to do that. But a person with some training from, their college education, putting in some time, paying those dues, can be very effective in a local area where there's a tremendous need for sport managers working at the local level, creating different kinds of sport resources. Shane, did you want to jump in on this?
No, sure. I mean, what Corey said was magnificent. So, anything that I would offer would just be in addition to that. But one of the thoughts that I have is that it is useful to approach sports in the more broad and holistic way that we've been describing today. I think a lot of us have a tendency when we think of, sport, like capital S, in terms of, the big four sports that are popular in North America, right? But of course, there are all sorts of different ways to engage with this. Moreover, not just a diversity of activities, but a diversity in the approach that we take to exploring and examining these things, right? And so even in the world of mountain biking, some of the concepts that we've described today are widely held, but some of them are maybe more controversial. And there's nothing inevitable about the way that we're experiencing these activities today. It's the way that they've evolved and developed over time. But you can turn that stuff on its head if you're creative, and you can be enthusiastic about an activity, but you can also explore it from a more critical perspective and see, what are the elements that are perhaps having a negative impact, and how do we thread that needle with the way that we engage in these activities. So as far as the professional side of it goes, I would say just be open to coming at it from a whole bunch of different angles. If you want to explore it from the more like psychosocial side that Jay and Jeff do, then that's fantastic. If you want to come at it from the more stewardship side, then you can do that in the way that Corey does with MedWheel, or something completely different. Maybe you want to focus on the community aspect or the environmental side of this. But I think that applies not just to cycling, but every other domain.
Yeah, and I think you used a word we haven't used yet, and that was critical. And I think that's one of the issues that I'm concerned about in sports sociology is when do people learn to ask those critical questions, and ask them not in a contentious way, but in a constructive way. And, how can you combine the critical questions with pragmatism, for example, and move in a direction that Jeff has been talking about, the sustainability issue, the consumption issue, and how can you ask questions that are critical, but also pragmatic in terms of keeping things going and getting people involved and meeting with friends. And so those are all issues that we're concerned about in all of these podcasts that we're doing. So this really overlaps with a lot of the other podcasts that we've had.
Well, gentlemen, that's just about all the time we have. With anything that we didn't ask you about that you think would be important for students in a sport class to hear?
Maybe I'll just underline what we were just talking about, like this idea of being a sports manager. It's around more than you imagine, and a really good place to look is in the nonprofit space, because that is where somebody has identified a need and has created something to move in that direction. So, don't just think about going to work for a pro baseball team. There are sports management opportunities in all places, and they're right there in your community. Nonprofits are a great place to look.
Yeah, I don't have anything all-encompassing or holistic to add other than I think bikes are pretty great. And to quote Grant Peterson, you should get out there and just ride.
Right, or as Joe Cruz said the other night at the event, you don't need a reason to ride, right? You don't need a reason to go out into nature. The pleasure of it is reason enough in and of itself. So we'll leave it there, since that is all the time we have for today's episode. Gentlemen, Corey, Shane, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. Really, I've been really looking forward to this episode, and it lived up to what I was hoping for. And we will have more episodes of the Sports and Society podcast coming out. And what do you think? Jump on our Discord server and join in the conversation. Tell us what you think about outdoor sports, municipal level sport management. There is a invite link that's available in the description to this episode. Thank you very much, and goodbye.